There was a boy who learned to count not with toys or books, but with the coins his mother collected from washing dishes at 3 different restaurants. Each night, he would sit on their apartment floor, a floor so thin that he could hear Mrs. Chen arguing with her husband downstairs and help his mother sort the day's earnings into small piles: rent, food, bus fare, hope. His name was Marcus, and he was 7 years old when he first understood that poverty wasn't just about having less money. It was about having more hunger. More hunger for success, more hunger for change, more hunger for a life that looked nothing like the one he was born into. What Marcus didn't know then, what none of us realize in our darkest moments, is that he was being forged in the same fire that has shaped 73% of the world's billionaires. The fire of necessity. The fire that burns away excuses and leaves behind only one question: what are you willing to do to change everything? The irony is beautiful and brutal. While some children learned that failure was optional, Marcus learned that failure was expensive. While others discovered that mistakes could be fixed with a phone call to dad, Marcus discovered that mistakes could mean no dinner. While privileged kids learned to dream big, Marcus learned something far more valuable. He learned to make dreams reality, because reality was the only thing that mattered. Every morning, Marcus watched his mother leave for her first job before sunrise. She moved like a ghost through their small apartment, trying not to wake him, but he was always awake. He would lie in bed and listen to her footsteps, counting them like a prayer. 23 steps from the bedroom to the kitchen, 15 steps from the kitchen to the door, 7 steps down the hallway. And then silence, the silence that meant she was gone, fighting a world that seemed determined to keep them down. But here's what poverty teaches you that wealth cannot. Resourcefulness isn't a skill, it's a survival mechanism. When Marcus needed a calculator for school and they couldn't afford one, he taught himself to do complex math in his head. When other kids had computers, he memorized the times when the local library offered free internet access and planned his homework around those precious 30-minute slots. When his shoes fell apart, he learned to fix them with duct tape and cardboard, turning necessity into ingenuity. These weren't just childhood inconveniences, they were training. Training for a mind that would one day look at billion-dollar problems and see solutions where others saw impossibilities. Training for a spirit that would refuse to accept no as a final answer. Training for a heart that would remember every person who said he couldn't and prove them beautifully wrong. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Marcus was 14, working his after-school job at a local grocery store when he overheard 2 customers talking about stocks. One man, dressed in an expensive suit, was explaining to his friend how he'd made $10,000 in a single day by buying shares in a technology company. $10,000. Marcus did the math in his head, a skill poverty had sharpened to perfection. That was more than his mother made in 8 months of washing dishes, more than their annual rent, more than he thought existed in the real world. That night, Marcus walked to the library, not taking the bus because every dollar mattered, and checked out every book on investing they had. The librarian, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed him struggling with the complex financial terms and did something that would change his life forever. She introduced him to Mr. Plos Patterson, a retired investment banker who volunteered at the library. Mr. Patterson looked at this skinny 14-year-old kid with worn-out shoes and hunger in his eyes and saw something familiar. He saw himself 30 years earlier, a poor kid from the wrong side of town who'd clawed his way to Wall Street through pure determination and an unwillingness to accept his circumstances as permanent. "You want to learn about money?" Mr. Patterson asked. "I want to learn about freedom," Marcus replied. And that's when Mr. Patterson smiled, because he knew that Marcus had already learned the most important lesson of all. Money isn't about money. Money is about choices. Money is about dignity. Money is about the ability to look your problems in the eye and have the resources to solve them. Under Mr. Patterson's guidance, Marcus began to understand something that would separate him from 99% of people. Wealth creation isn't about having money to invest. It's about having the mindset to see opportunities where others see obstacles. Marcus started small. He saved every dollar from his grocery store job, not spending a cent on the things other teenagers wanted. While his classmates bought video games and clothes, Marcus bought his first share of stock for $15. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. It was proof that he could play in a game that seemed designed for people like him to lose. But poverty had taught Marcus something else: patience. Real patience. Not the kind of patience that comes from knowing everything will be okay, but the kind of patience that comes from knowing that if you don't make it work, no one else will. He watched his single share of stock with the intensity of a mother watching her sleeping child. He learned to read financial reports the way other kids read comic books. He memorized market trends the way other kids memorized song lyrics. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, his $15 became $25, then $50, then $100. His mother noticed the change in him first. Not the money, there wasn't enough yet to notice, but the way he carried himself, the way he looked at problems, the way he stopped seeing their circumstances as permanent and started seeing them as temporary. "What are you learning at that library?" she asked one evening as they counted her day's tips together. "I'm learning that poor people don't stay poor because they don't work hard enough," Marcus said, sorting her coins with the same precision he now applied to analyzing stock charts. "They stay poor because they don't know the rules of money, but the rules can be learned." By 16, Marcus had turned his grocery store savings into $500 in the stock market. By 17, it was $2,000. But more importantly, he had developed something that no amount of inherited wealth could buy: the ability to make money from nothing. He started noticing opportunities everywhere. When the local grocery store owner mentioned struggling with inventory management, Marcus offered to build him a simple computer system in exchange for a percentage of the money saved. When his classmates complained about not having a place to buy affordable school supplies, Marcus started buying in bulk and selling at a small profit. Each venture taught him something new. Each failure, and there were failures, taught him something valuable. Each success built not just his bank account, but his confidence in his ability to create value from thin air. The day Marcus graduated high school, he had $7,000 in savings and something far more valuable: a mind trained by poverty to see solutions where others saw problems. College wasn't an option, not because he couldn't get in, but because he couldn't afford to wait 4 years to start his real education. While his classmates headed off to universities their parents paid for, Marcus headed to the city with his life savings, a used laptop, and a hunger that had been sharpened by 18 years of necessity. He rented a room so small that he could touch both walls with his arms outstretched. It was smaller than the apartment he'd shared with his mother, but it was his. For the first time in his life, Marcus fell asleep to the sound of his own breathing instead of his mother's worried sighs. His first business was simple, a website that helped local restaurants manage their online reviews. He built it himself, learning to code from free online tutorials, working 16-hour days because sleep felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. The website failed. His second business, a service that connected college students with part-time jobs, failed too. So did his third, and his fourth. But here's what poverty had taught Marcus that privilege could not. Failure isn't the opposite of success. Failure is the raw material of success. Each failure taught him something. Each failure connected him with people who would later become partners, investors, mentors. Each failure refined his understanding of what people actually needed versus what they said they wanted. His fifth business was different. By then, Marcus had noticed something that his privileged competitors missed. Small businesses were struggling not because they didn't work hard, but because they didn't have access to the same tools and resources as big companies. He created a platform that gave small business owners access to professional-grade marketing, accounting, and customer management tools for a fraction of what they normally cost. He understood their struggles because he'd lived them. He understood their dreams because they were his dreams. He understood their fears because they were his fears. The business grew slowly at first, then quickly, then explosively. Within 2 years, Marcus had helped over 10,000 small businesses increase their revenue by an average of 30%. Within 3 years, his company was valued at $50 million. But success brought its own challenges. Suddenly, Marcus was invited to conferences where people wanted to know his secret. Investors who wouldn't have returned his calls 2 years earlier were begging for meetings. Magazines wanted to write profiles about the overnight success, who'd built a $50 million company from nothing. Overnight success. Marcus almost laughed at the irony. 23 years of poverty, counting coins on thin apartment floors, working after-school jobs, teaching himself to code, failing at 4 different businesses that was some overnight. The real test came when a major corporation offered to buy his company for $200 million. $200 million. Marcus did the math in his head the same way he'd been doing math since he was 7 years old. It was enough to buy his mother any house she wanted. Enough to never worry about money again. Enough to prove to everyone who doubted him that he'd made it. But as Marcus sat in the gleaming conference room, surrounded by lawyers and executives in $1,000 suits, he realized something profound. He wasn't the same person who'd started this journey. Poverty hadn't just taught him to make money. It had taught him to create value. It had taught him that real wealth wasn't about what you could buy, but about what you could build. He turned down the offer. Instead, Marcus took his company public. On the day of the IPO, his stake was worth over $1 billion. But more importantly, his platform was now helping over 1 million small businesses worldwide. People like his mother, people who worked 3 jobs and still struggled to pay rent, now had access to tools that helped them build better lives for their families. Standing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, watching the opening bell ceremony for his company, Marcus thought about that 7-year-old boy counting coins on a thin apartment floor. He thought about his mother's 23 steps from the bedroom to the kitchen. He thought about every person who'd said he couldn't make it, every door that had been closed in his face, every night he'd gone to bed hungry. And he realized that they'd all been gifts. Every struggle, every setback, every moment when quitting seemed like the only rational option. They had all been preparing him for this moment. Not just the moment of financial success, but the moment when he could use that success to lift others up. After the market closed, Marcus called his mother. She was still working at the restaurant, not because she had to anymore, but because, as she told him, "These people depend on me, and I don't quit on people who depend on me." "Mom," he said, "I have some news." "Did something happen? Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay." "And Mom, you don't have to count coins anymore. Ever." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, he heard her crying. Not the worried tears he'd heard so many nights through thin apartment walls, but tears of joy, tears of pride. Tears of a mother who'd raised a son who understood that success wasn't about escaping where you came from. It was about remembering where you came from and using that memory to build something beautiful. Today, Marcus's story is one of thousands. 73% of the world's billionaires started with nothing. They started with empty pockets but full hearts. They started with challenges that seemed insurmountable, but refused to see them as permanent. They started with hunger not just for food, but for something better. The poverty advantage isn't about romanticizing struggle or pretending that being poor is easy. Poverty is hard. Poverty is painful. Poverty leaves scars that never fully heal. But poverty also teaches lessons that cannot be learned in any classroom. It teaches you that comfort is earned, not given. It teaches you that resourcefulness isn't a nice-to-have skill, it's essential for survival. It teaches you to find opportunity in the spaces where others see only obstacles. Most importantly, poverty teaches you empathy. When you've been hungry, you never forget what hunger feels like. When you've been overlooked, you never forget to notice others who are overlooked. When you've been told you can't make it, you never forget to encourage others who are told the same thing. The billionaires who started with nothing didn't succeed despite their poverty. They succeeded because of what their poverty taught them. They learned to make something from nothing because nothing was all they had to work with. They learned to persist through failure because failure was familiar territory. They learned to create value because they understood what it meant to need value created. But here's the most beautiful part of Marcus's story, and stories like his. Success didn't erase his past, it gave his past meaning. Every coin he'd counted as a child had taught him the value of money. Every failure had taught him the process of learning. Every struggle had taught him the strength he didn't know he had. And now, when young entrepreneurs come to him for advice, when they tell him about their struggles and their fears and their dreams that seem impossible, Marcus doesn't tell them that success is guaranteed. He doesn't tell them that hard work always pays off. He doesn't give them false hope or empty promises. Instead, he tells them the truth, that poverty isn't a disadvantage to overcome, it's an advantage to embrace. That struggle isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to be grateful for. That starting with nothing doesn't mean you have nothing, it means you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. He tells them that 73% of billionaires started exactly where they are now. Not because poverty magically creates billionaires, but because poverty creates the mindset, the work ethic, the resourcefulness, and the hunger that billionaires are made of. The boy who learned to count with his mother's coin collection became the man who taught the world that wealth isn't about where you start, it's about what you do with where you start. And somewhere tonight, in a thin-walled apartment, A child is counting coins with their parent. Learning math not from textbooks, but from necessity. Learning patience not from philosophy, but from waiting. Learning hope not from fairy tales, but from watching someone they love refuse to give up. That child doesn't know it yet, but they're not learning to be poor. They're learning to be unstoppable. Because the greatest advantage in life isn't being born with everything. It's being born with nothing, and discovering that nothing is exactly what you need to build everything.